We have no cellular contracts at any of the facilities anymore. Predominantly, those were both at stations 4 and at station 1. In all cases, I don't know that that was in the best interest of the district. I mean, what we got for those contracts and the problems that it created, I think going forward, just, maybe as a reminder to all of you, or at least a word of caution, is that I think we've got far less than the problems that it created, especially at Station 1, because it was a training facility. We literally limited the use of the training facility specific to, what we did when we installed booms on the side of the building, right next to the dormitory, by the way, as well. And had areas in that training tower you could not use because of the high frequency waves that said you had to be within so many feet of the boom. One of the things tonight I can give you an update on too, we went ahead, I authorized John to spend $5,000 to get a structural evaluation of the training tower. It's not completely done, but we will have a report for you. I don't know if it'll be done by the board meeting, but one of the things I've always been concerned about in that training facility, the tower that we have, is that if we had another major earthquake, since that sits over the top of our dormitory, does that present a risk to the firefighters that are in the dormitory? So we're presently evaluating that. Based upon the results, we could certainly either reinforce, modify, or what I would suggest is maybe even take down part of that tower if it's a threat to the firefighters. So that's currently being looked at. I know today, John shared with me right before this meeting, and John's also on this call tonight, so John and Todd are on this call. They can speak to a couple of different things, but that we can no longer use the rappelling station off the training tower. So it's rotted, it's unsafe, and the engineer let us know that today. So at this point, unless we do repair or replacement to that, we can't rappel off the tower until that's fixed, which is a good thing that we took a look at it and didn't have a problem. All that said,
yeah, Chief, if I could just stop you there. What will we do in the interim as far as training, rappelling, and any related activities?
You could still go over the side, so you'd have to anchor around the tower parapet entry itself. We've done that, but we won't have a high point anchor, which if you look up on the tower, you'll see is on a beam above in the roof structure. So they can do a lower point, which is a little bit more difficult to navigate over the top, or we go out to the rescue site and use the metal training tower that's out there, or some offsite location like we've used the University Circle and so forth before.
Okay.
Is it ideal? No. Is it, should we have a functional tower? Yeah, we should. I think that's, hopefully gonna be part of the conversation tonight, because, for me, mostly it was, let's go ahead and move up the safety review of the tower, because I think that's a real important thing. And then also at some point, the committees, yesterday, at least strategic planning, I believe, or maybe it was finance, saw a little bit of an overview of a plan or a proposal to fence the area that we purchased from St. Patrick's Seminary in, so that we know the true footprint of the facility that we have and can start to utilize some of that space, but at least know where the property ends and starts. So the two things, I like to see happen, sooner rather than later. One is in play is that structural evaluation for both the safety and options going forward. Hopefully, like I said, you'll have that by the board meeting, and then the fencing, which I think we can bring to that meeting for sure in some way. All that gets us to what has happened with the space needs, which was included as an attachment, and then also I tried to send you a supplemental last night. Hopefully, you got to see it, of work that was done back in 2018. Of what a tower could look like. And just for historical purposes, let me say to you, years ago, before we even started any of the station projects, there was a emphasis by the board that they actually wanted to build the training tower first, because we didn't want training to be disrupted. And obviously we valued the firefighters, having the ability to train. and to train at Station 1 because the staff and the chief officers agreed it was central to the district. We're limited there, obviously, to do any type of live fire burning, but there are other things that you can do there. So, Station 1, and this is in here tonight, is still a critical facility for us for three reasons. One is it's a fire station, right? And we're not proposing to move that. Although I would not propose that it be the highest priority as you look at if you were to split this up. The second thing is we have a classroom facility which also doubles as your boardroom. Now that we're coming to the end of COVID in-person meetings again, you'll be utilizing that facility. And we all know the pros and cons or limitations of that facility to some extent. And the proposal has always been to make a bigger room, have a board meeting room associated with the board conference area for public meetings. So having a meeting room where you can meet privately and closed, and then in open. And having up to about, I think we said at one point, 75 occupancy for about 75 people, still doubling as a training facility because obviously that would be a good co-use for that facility. And then finally, the training tower itself, which we've alluded to and said in here, we think should be a 360 accessible facility for a lot of reasons we can get into. But before we go into any of that, what I tried to do in the discussion, which, will be helpful tonight, is just start at the basic, right? Is this still the most important project? I mean, we've talked about 77. I think we all know that's in the queue a little bit. We've talked recently about Station 5, which is more than likely not in the right place, but you have to find land. Are we willing to do that? I don't think 3 is a priority. The good news is we have the land behind it. We have the land next to it. I think you're probably 20 years away on that. But those are all just assumptions because, you again need to prioritize what is the most important project. I think it's this because it was built in 1955. But, I tried to make a number of steps or phases in here so you can give us guidance and we're all hopefully going to agree on next steps because that's going to be critical. So, Jim, I don't want to get ahead of you. The report's a report, the sequence is the sequence. If you want to, lead and walk through those items and get the feel of the board, I think that would probably be helpful. And then, like I said, John Hitchcock, we gave you the parking chart. He can explain it, but anything we do is parking is a factor, right? If we make it the admin side again, we have to have parking. If we make it where fire prevention operates out of there, we have to factor in parking. If we make it a classroom training facility, you got to address parking. If you have a fire station, based upon how many people you think are going to work in the fire station, you got to add parking. We talked about this. We know the space needs assessment proposal. There were, I think, 3 or 4 different ways to do Station 1. I believe there was only one that they showed that did not have underground parking. I will tell you what our sentiment has been, and obviously it wasn't the contractor, but the contractor doesn't have to pay for it, was that we didn't think you needed subsurface parking for probably the biggest reason, which is, it's going to cost well over $10 million, especially right now. And that would have to be the first thing that you did, no matter what you did. And you'd probably have to tear everything down on the site to accomplish it. So is that really what we want to do? I don't think it is. But again, I think we got to get past that first. But parking will drive, I think, some of the decision making, and then phases in here. I think we see it a certain way, but I want to make sure you see it that way because I think incrementally we can make this project move faster and sequentially, even if we don't have all the money, but we look at how to prioritize certain things, meaning tower, classroom, station, and kind of go in that order. But again, I don't want to surmise that's what the board wants to do. We had discussed an EOC. That's an option for you to put a second story on that classroom for whatever reason. As Director McLaughlin knows, we've been talking to the city of Menlo Park about their desire to locate a well here. Most recently, they gave us a proposal for that to be, we had originally said at one point, just over 1,000 square feet. And then they came back and said, we need 10,000, which was kind of shocking because that's about a quarter of the space that we bought from St. Patrick's Seminary. And I'll let, Jim talk to that. We've had some
Chief,
discussion with them. So.
Chief, before we move off that point, have we gotten any feedback on the city relative to the to what the footprint size is? What are their needs?
They would work with us, is what they said. So, I don't think it's 10,000. I think it can be less than that. But I think how that factors in here, as I wrote in that supplemental, form follows function, is maybe go through this process first and see if it's a possibility. I think it could be, and then see what's available, right, to actually address that. Because that also, as we know, we're still trying to work with the city on things like Fire Station 77, and so there may be some ways to work with, we move here, they move there. I don't want to propose what the city could do because I've kind of been wrong about it at times. But
Sure.
At the end of the day, I think once we go through this exercise, then the reality of what could be left to do a well or where to put it will hopefully be clearer than it has been, and everybody will be hopefully on the same page. Storage, again, classroom, second story, all those different things are listed in here. But I think I tried to think of all the different questions and the way forward that would come up, because unlike a fire station, like I said, this is the biggest station. It's now the oldest. It's got the most variables, meaning that we do more things here. And that's not to say that we can't also use our warehouse. So, when we say storage, just know that sometimes the storage is convenient because of the location, and it may not be as convenient based upon having a warehouse in East Palo Alto. But in volume, you would not need to store certain things there either. So there is ways to become, I think, more efficient. You'll see that on a report at 77 where we have a forklift. And so rack storage is always a possibility when you have forklifts to store things in a tighter area too. So, there's a lot of variables. I gave you what we did, like I just said, after the parking chart that John probably is best to speak to. I gave you what we had talked with WLC about with a training tower. I know Todd will speak to that if you want him to do that. It is certainly a large structure. It may be larger than the neighborhood would like, which is factoring into, or we could possibly afford. But I think Todd makes a good case for the reasons that he would like to see a tower like that, which is a functional, there's functional requirements that he would like to see. But like anything, you got to make it fit. The good news with the training tower that we have is to the top of the antenna today is 90 feet. So no matter what we do with the city of Menlo Park in terms of approvals, that's the current threshold of where we are. If we work within that 90-foot height, we should be fine as far as I'm concerned. The city may say something different, but it's like, what's the pre-existing? If we're replacing like for like, at least in height, maybe not necessarily in square footage, those are issues. Last thing I'll finish with is the station. We've discussed, and again, I'm not saying this should be the highest priority of the three elements, but we've discussed a single-story station. We've discussed a two-story station. If we make it a two-story, we can make it similar to the ones that we're currently building. That will take less space. If we make it a one-story, it could take more space. If you add admin and prevention, then you'll need even more space. So, and what's the benefit of co-housing that versus the disruption that could also create? Because I can tell you, business offices, in my opinion, operate better when they're not in a working fire station where there's a lot of distractions, a lot of people coming and going. and that's the true function is a business function. I think we're close enough a block away because people walk back and forth that A, it's healthy to do that, number one, weather's mostly great, and B, we're not necessarily in their way and they're not necessarily in our way. So I know there's been discussion about selling the two buildings and moving everything over, but I think that's worthy of a broader discussion of functionality, efficiency, and then what's it all fall back on? Parking, because you're gonna need a lot more parking to do that. So that's where we are. I hope that's a good synopsis. I'm happy that we're, in this conversation again. It is not going to be a fast process. It shouldn't be, but I also think it's going to be too laborious because, there's, again, certain elements that we've already dealt with other projects that are pretty much known. The schematic that you have in the supplemental shows that it can all fit. So that gets you a station, that gets you the classroom, that gets you a training tower with that 360. And that only could happen because we bought land. And if you look, we have a drainage area that equally could be where you could have a well site. So, and the city then would have to agree that we could have drainage and some other configuration or vegetation or whatever. So there is room or latitude from what I see in that initial schematic that we did back in 2018 that shows that all of these things can fit within one site. And that was before we actually did Station 4's design. So, I think we're better now at looking at what a true Station 2 or Station 4 space needs, 10-bed, 3-bay drive-through station requirements are. So that's my report, my update, and then happy to take questions or to move through the process.
Chief, I have to ask is what do you want to come out of the meeting today? Because I'll just share some thoughts. As I've considered this, I think there's a common agreement that Station 1, the operating fire station, is antiquated to the point of being obsolete and needs to be replaced. Right, it's 65 years old and has served the district well, but now it's time to replace it. But with these other factors of do we co-locate our headquarters facility at that site? Do we, locate the training tower at that site? What's the parking configuration? For me, it kind of spills into also the warehouse in Station 77. Are there functions that are better at those sites? And then, what does that look like? So, just my point is that I think it's going to be hard for us to focus solely on Station 1 without taking those other elements into account. So I guess my question would still stand, Harold. What, Chief, what is it that you would like to see as an outcome today?
I don't want to jump in front of Rob. I think he's got a question. So before I answer that, Rob's got something to say, I believe.
No, why don't you go ahead? I think I posed my question before.
No. Chief, I yield to you. Thank you.
I see everybody. Not always I get to see everybody on one screen. Here's what I would say to that, right? I started out, and hopefully I've emphasized it. The structural analysis of the tower, because that's a safety issue for me. That's a big deal as far as I'm concerned that we needed to do before, still need to do it. It then speaks to the urgency of a training facility or training tower. How would we, where else can we do these functions? Because having that capability at Station 1, I can tell you is very efficient. I can talk, Todd can speak to this. So that's my number one. My number two is the fencing of the property is just a better way to still be able to currently even begin to use it and know where the lines are so you can see the true footprint, put a drone up, look at it, and so forth. And then exactly what you're saying, I think you got to walk through a process. I mean, I'm not opposed to, looking at the warehouse, but I think you got to be careful with that too, because if we say we're going to move something like training out there, then how would that work? And would you move something from there to headquarters or station one? And what would that be? And would Menlo Park agree to it, right? Because you kind of got an existing non-conforming structure there with the functions, which everybody's used to. So that's helpful. So it's not as if we're changing it up. I don't know if, I don't know if we said we're moving the shop facilities back, would that be welcome or, not, because now we're doing fleet maintenance and so forth. So I think you do have to ask some of those questions. I don't know that 77 is a good question, only because we don't own it, so we still always end up with this big question mark, how much money do we want to spend when you don't own something, and what makes sense. And we have some good discussion on the shop. So one of the ones too for me is, I know it's come up, should we use it as a regional training center or should we go somewhere else? Which I think is, with where fuel's going and just time and so forth, is probably not a good use of money or people's time. And then the last one, what's the priority or phasing? Let me just say, I mean, we've got half of this department is got 6 years or less. And, having the ability to meaningfully train daily, these guys don't train like we did when I started, I can tell you that. And I don't mean that as in a disrespectful way or we were better or whatever. We were able to use the tower. And, we could ladder it, we could rappel off it, we could smoke it. We did a lot of different things. That we pulled hoses in there, we shot water in there. Probably not the best idea because all the radio communications were in there, and it's wood and it rotted, and there's all these ridiculous things that we shouldn't have been doing. And the smoke room's attached in the same stairwell to the dormitory. I mean, it's just crazy how this thing was built. But, I think that training aspect for me, and I hope, again, I hope we have time to let Todd really speak to it, because I know he's passionate about it, is really, really important. We don't get the amount of fire activity we used to get. So when you don't have that, simulation, training, practicing is really important. And I think that's why that 360 tower is so important to training, because you can use multi-companies and really continue to maintain being good at what we need to really be good at, when we really don't do it as often as maybe we used to. And today, what we're going to do differently. Now, you can say we have the training side, right, where we can burn things. That's true. And I wouldn't say get rid of that. I think that's a great site, but we can't do everything there. I think all the aerial operations, multi-company operations, wet operations, especially if you can put some sort of way to collect the water in there, that's a great way to go. So what am I looking for today myself? Number one, the first two, but for sure, to put this on the path so that you get down the road and these things start to happen, hopefully in phases, and in a logical, cost-effective but practical time sequence way, because that to me makes the most sense. So, and I think, again, we have a lot of people that are looking at this project and hoping certain things happen because, they see Station One as a pivotal project and as a major place where things happen and have always happened, because it makes sense to have, for example, a training facility there. So, and a classroom too, right, where you can use the meeting room. So that's what I'm looking for.
All right. Rob?
Yeah. Thank you, Jim. Chief, thank you for preparing all this. On page 2 of 2 of our first report, you break down from 1 to 16. Really good talking points relative to the Station 1 building there. And then, of course, on the second report on page 2, there's listed the evaluation of the process and the findings. And there are quite a few of those there also. And I went through each one of them. Jim, I have like 5 questions I want to ask. If you want me to break them up, I'll be more than happy to yield to other board members.
You know, why don't you go start with a couple, and if it goes
Okay.
long, we'll
Okay.
pause.
All right, thanks. After reviewing the packet, I have well, a lot of questions. The first one would be, since we have the accreditation project in process still and hasn't been completed, we've put out a request for proposal for an inspection review and audit, which has not been completed, it's just been put out. And we have a request for proposal for a study of our emergency prep function. Myself and Chuck from our committee from strategic planning, we had requested that this be forwarded to the full board for discussion. And I think it's kind of soon, since we are in the process of hiring a new chief. And I would like to get his or her evaluation of some of these areas that are addressed. And the one that probably concerns me the most is towards the bottom of page 2 of the second report, where it talks about an emergency operations center is desired. Well, you know, we've been pondering that ever since I've been on the board, and you know, that's not really a function of the fire district. So that's just one thing that I'm sure this emergency preparedness evaluation will tell us how we're supposed to deal with that, since we're a special district and don't have that primary responsibility. So I think we're, you know, you've done a great job here, and I really, you know, appreciate your vision, since you've been here for a number of years, not only as the chief, but as a firefighter. So I appreciate all that, but you know, I see that a lot of this discussion, yep, we're aware of it. I mean, I'm looking through it. I see the Fair Oak station there at Station 5. I mean, you know, I know that the county doesn't want us to remove that, and for us to keep that station, even though it's a small station. So there's a lot of things here that I would definitely, not only with these reports that we have, but I'd also like to get the input of the new fire chief too, and his or her senior staff. So that's all I have, Jim, but thank you.
All right. Any other thoughts or comments before we delve into the chief's report?
Jim?
Chuck? I think I saw Chuck first. So we can hear.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, I think one of the difficulties that I had in looking at the options which we were given is that each option has so many moving parts at the same time that it's hard to keep that in mind and balance all these things and so forth. I think we would be well served with starting with 2 things, and I'm proposing this almost as the chief said, with an idea of developing a plan for how we go forward. One is that I think we truly need a space needs assessment. And what we got here is from the last thing we did, which unfortunately didn't give us a space needs assessment, is we need to figure out how much space we need for certain things. For example, we did learn that we don't expect to hire any more administrators in the next, whatever it's at 20 or 30 years. Okay, if that's the expectation, that's fine. But it never said anything, for example, about fire prevention. It talked about moving fire prevention from here to there and all that, but it didn't talk about how much space we needed for fire prevention. Same thing with the idea of storage. Let's put storage here or there, but how much space do we really need for storage? And it seemed to me that we need some specifics about what we need for each of these functions. So that's kind of one thing of how much space. The second thing is there seem to be some priorities on a number of things that if we could resolve those, we reduce the number of options. And let me just give one example right now. Um, do we want a fire station on the same property that the administrative offices are on? I mean, there are people that say yes, people say no. It seemed to me if we could resolve that, we could then make a plan that said, one, we need another property entirely, or two, maybe we could take the site we have and somehow reorient it so the station faces this way and the admin faces this way, and the two are kind of disconnected physically or something. In other words, that would be kind of an architectural thing. There's some issues about, do we want the storage centralized or decentralized? Did we put it, we got a little here, a little in the rail cars, a little at the warehouse, a little that. I feel the same thing about vehicle storage. Oh, we store this vehicle there and that, and they're all over the place. And then there's things, what do we want co-located? Should, for example, the mechanic shop be co-located with vehicle storage? If that's desirable, let's make a plan to do that. And then some of these other options disappear. So I guess what I'm saying is I actually think that it would be helpful to have, I'll call it a quick and dirty space needs assessment where we actually assess, forget the fire station, we know that, but for these other things, how much space are we going to need for each of these functions? And then we can plan accordingly. And secondly, I think then we should take issue by issue and try to resolve those issues. We may not be able to implement 100% of what we would like, but at least we'd know what our priorities were. For example, one priority might be to keep Station 1 and admin separate. If that's it, we say, okay, that's a priority. Can we do it or can we not do it? And we seem to be making decisions kind of out of order. For example, we complain about a 2 or 3 acre parking garage at 10 million, but what a parking garage, underground spaces, we're building land. We're paying 6 million an acre right now for land. So if we pay 6 million to get an extra acre of land underground, what's the difference between paying that? I mean, I think we have emotional things, and I think we need to get rid of the emotions and really get these things done in kind of a linear fashion. So I would like to see us prioritize. One, I'd like to see our space needs assessment, quick and dirty, fast, done in 2 months or something, where we figure out how many square feet of storage do we want, and do we want it centralized or decentralized, things like that. And then I think we need to then have a list of the priority decisions, as Rob brought up. Do we want a emergency operations center, or in fact, could the classroom be, transformed in about 20 minutes from a classroom into an emergency operations center? And therefore, we've killed 2 birds with 1 stone. We just don't have that information right now. So it's really hard to develop a detailed plan without this foundation.
Right. Virginia?
Yeah, so I'm not totally against what Chuck has said, although I wouldn't necessarily want to do another needs assessment. I agree that the first one that we did was not exactly probably what rest of the board wanted, but I don't want to have to spend more money on a needs assessment. So, I do kind of trust what the chief is saying after a 40+ year career here, being in the trenches and being in management, and so I don't know, Harold, how maybe we talk a little more about how the planning should be. I do agree with Chuck that there probably needs to be some more planning, which will allow us to understand our priorities better. I mean, I'll bring up the example that Chuck's brought up about admin and the fire station being in one building. I mean, Rob and I are probably the only 2 board members, I think, Harold. I can't remember when we did 170 when we moved in there, but I think Rob and I are probably the only 2 board members today where we actually had the admin office in Station 1. Is that correct, for a little bit before we moved to 170?
I believe it's 10 years ago that we moved in. So I think that's correct. Yeah.
Yeah. And so at first I mean, I'll admit I was kind of like emotionally attached to, oh my gosh, we like having the admin building at Station One, but I got to tell you, it was so much better having it um as a standalone location, mainly because fire prevention is in there and people, the public actually uses that building, the admin building 170. And just having our meetings there, I thought was a lot better. But again, that's something that we probably need to discuss as a board for planning purposes and to kind of outline what our priorities would be. But I don't know if I'm prepared to do a whole other needs assessment, go out for an RFP, come back and do this yet another study, when we have people that we can rely on who have built their careers here, and not just Harold. I mean, Harold and your staff. I mean, I think we should get input from the people who use these buildings every single day, right? So that's my assessment of that. I think it can be done pretty quickly. I would say instead of 2 months, Chuck, maybe within the next 2 to 3 weeks, let's get something at worst case scenario. But I agree that we need to get a plan, a plan that will allow us to prioritize what we think our needs are. I just don't want to do another needs assessment or space needs assessment after we spent a lot of money and a lot of time on the other one. And I'd rather go directly to the people who use these facilities.
Robert, did you have any comments at this juncture?
Yes, throughout the process, I think. Yeah, I know we've when I first got on the board, a couple of years ago, the notion and the conversation around rehabilitating, tearing down, and building new fire station. Only one I wasn't a part of the conversation was Station 2, which is in East Palo Alto, that kind of got off the ground first. What is it appears to me that's slowing us down is that either we as a board don't have a clear picture of a development phase of developing property, and because we take a step or two forward, and then we rehash the same issues that I thought that were taken care of 3 years ago, and it's been a progressive movement towards developing all of our property. Now it seems like the space need assessment is back in the realm. Before we already spent $200,000 somewhere in that neighborhood for the first one, and now we want another one because the first one didn't quite give us what we want. It's the repetitive pattern that it seemed like it is happening over and over again, that the information that we get to make a decision at the point in time we ask for the information is not good enough down the road once we get the information and assess that this is some of the stuff that we want, or the information we wanted. So because right at this juncture in our development, of this property, one, yes, I think the chief has valuable information after 40 years of being around this particular fire station. We need to take advantage of whatever the information that he has on a historical basis. Maybe some may not feel like it's important enough and wait for the new chief, but the new chief may come in with a whole different direction that you want to take. Well, we're going to battle him at that point in time. I think the new person given it the chief to come in should have at least a blueprint of what the board and staff have came up with as to the direction it needs to go, and then perform and measure that person's performance based upon carrying out those instructions. Clearly, there are some issues, it seems like, in terms of understanding whether we have a training room, standalone training room, or a training room boardroom, or a training room boardroom EOC. Yeah, that's you got three different things, and yes, it can get complicated. But in terms of architecture designing that, it can be one room or it can be multiple room. I think the question is being able to say, yes, we want all of these, three of these things, and allow the architect to kind of make that happen based upon the footprint that we have, rather than trying to get in and trying to figure out, oh yeah, we need to move it over here and there. Let the architect do it, because that's what they're trained to do. And I think having staff there to help facilitate that and guide that person through whatever is necessary. They know what they want. I mean, I can't come in my house and tell me what I want. You know, I've been here and I'm operating around it, but I can't come in your house and tell you. But we can all kind of figure out if we got a third house that we're going to build, what are some neat features should go in each one into that new structure. So I think, to me, that's where I thought this meeting was going to be about today, was kind of, you know, the relevant points. Do we want a microwave in the admin building or not? Oh, yes or no? I mean, and if the answer is no, then we move on. We drop it and move on. So I know it sounding simplistic. It is as simple as that. And until we get to that point in making those concrete decisions, we're going to be back at the table next year or 6 months from now, still worrying about issues that we have talked about 3 years ago. Thank you, Jim. I'm done.
All right, thank you.
And I do have my list to talk about the things if we want to get to that point.
Sure. You know, looking at the, you know, there's list of, you know, 16 points that you've outlined, Chief, that relate to Station 1. I think it'd be, it would have value, you know, for us to review that list, and even, you know, to give you know, the staff some idea of where we're at on these, on each one of these items. So I would ask, I think we can move through them fairly quickly. You know, I would just remind us, if we spend 5 minutes on each one, that's well over an hour. So if, you know, where it makes sense to group them, and if we're just not prepared to really have a meaningful discussion, you know, right now, then perhaps we'll just defer. But with that said, perhaps you could start working down the list, and we'll see, you know, try to do it efficiently.
Yeah, I think that does make the most sense. I mean, if you listen, you know, obviously all the board members, there's different opinions and obviously priorities, or, you know, things that maybe could be different. But I think that's when we tried to do this, and I wasn't alone. It was, you know, where are we today, right? What do you want us to do going forward? And yeah, understanding I'm not going to be here very much longer, so, you know, somebody else is going to take and pick this up. And in that gap, you know, for Mike Schaefer as the interim, or the staff, you know, what do you want them to be working on? Because we're clearly there. So for the first one, you know, I guess it would be helpful, and if you want to go around just to see, you know, is Station 1 still everybody's highest priority? Because we say that, but then again, I think we just need to confirm that, right? Because if that's the number one priority, then that's the number one thing that should be focused on, including if you look at where we put money aside, right, for that
Yeah,
purpose.
Chief, before we do that, if we could just get your recommendation, you know, is the replacement of Station 1 as an operating firehouse, is that a higher priority than 77, the warehouse, or anything else, the admin building? Is that your highest priority?
It is. Yeah, I think you're there. That entire complex was built in 1955. You know, as everybody knows, it's outdated, it's got problems, and it needs to be incrementally replaced.
All right. Well, I'll go first. I mean, I concur with your view of this, and endorse your recommendation that be at the top of our facility replacement list. So, Virginia?
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, it's such a heavily used station as well. So I would agree with you and the chief, Jim.
All right,
I mean, as the top priority of the on the list.
right. Rob?
Now, I agree it's a top priority, but, you know, as which is mentioned in the staff report, you know, do we want to separate it from training facility? Do we just want it like a standalone station and then separate it? Do we want to bring admin services?
Well, I think that gets into, you know, item number 2.
Right, but I mean, you know what I'm saying, Jim? I
Sure.
mean,
No, I don't know how you separate them.
that's what I mean.
I'm getting ahead of myself here, but I think Station 2, you know, I think we are looking at some sort of phased program, and I don't have enough information. I wouldn't presume to try to say what those phases are, how many are they, how many phases are there, you know, and what would be included in each phase. So Robert?
I think the question, because I'm trying to find a list, but I'm going by what you're saying in terms of whether Station 1 should be a high priority. We got how many other buildings? 4 other buildings we're working on at this point in time. So the question based upon that is, out of the 4, is Station 1 the highest priority we should be working on? We're already working on 4, so we can probably take that out of the loop. So we only got 3 left. So the thing is, out of those 3, which one should come next? And I think it's narrowing down to let's start on Station 1 since it's the oldest, it's going to be the biggest. Let's move on that, because one of the concerns I have is how we're going to pay for it, kind of thing. But yeah. So we had to vote on which one. I'm saying yes. I see it as number 1 out of the 3.
Chuck, do you have a view on this?
Yeah, I would not say that it was my number 1. I think there are 2 priorities that are ahead of it. One is, I think the maintenance shop is a higher priority. We already have a piece of equipment that's larger than what we can accommodate. Winter's coming up and we can't have a mechanic sit out working in the rain and so forth. So to me, the mechanic shop is the number 1 priority. I would say the second priority for me is securing ownership of the Station 77 property in order to know that we're going to be there for the long term. And thirdly, I think that, yeah, Station 1 is probably a priority, but I think the other 2 are more important.
Yeah.
Virginia?
Yeah, so maybe I misunderstood, but that I mean, we haven't had a chance to really discuss fully how we're going to deal with Station 77, but Station 1 wouldn't be at the exclusion of dealing with Station 77, would it be? I mean, I thought this would be more of a capital project versus a property issue.
Right. I go back. I mean, the item specifically says facility replacement.
Right.
So, the repair facility at Station 77 would be a repair and enhancement versus replacement. So if we just focus on replacement facility, where does Station 1 fall?
Right, but okay, so Chuck, did I hear you right when you mentioned the
I thought we were talking
purchase?
about competition for district resources, essentially money. And so I'm talking
Oh,
about
I see. Okay.
district money. And
Okay, I get it.
And just so you know that the 77 property is, the shop facility is budgeted for next year for replacement. So that is in the budget.
Right, but are you talking about the purchase of the property? I'm sorry, I'm just want to make sure I've got it clear in my mind.
I'm talking about 2 separate things. I'm talking
Right.
about the shop, and the chief has called it a replacement. We originally talked about it as an add-on. I think we're getting into splitting hairs now about whether it's replacement or whether it's an amended building or something. And I don't think that discussion is actually very relevant. I think the question is, are we going to spend money for it? To me, the first money I'd have, I'd put into the shop. The second money I'd have, I'd put into buying the Station 77 property. And the third money I would have, I would put in probably Station 1.
Okay.
All right. Rob, did you weigh in on this, Rob?
Well, I kind of, Station 1 is a priority, but Chuck, by him talking about the maintenance facility, and we do have vehicles that don't even fit in some of these stations. I would say that what Chuck's mentioned about that to be one of our priorities too. And another thing which Chuck mentioned about this needs assessment is that, there's one of these things that says office space is crammed and the district administration facilities have no additional space to accommodate the existing and future deficiencies. Well, there's a lot of space, and I'm not an expert, but there's a lot of space at the admin building that we have behind our main admin building, the other building, what is it, Margarita? That one, and then we have a considerable amount of space at Station 1 that could be jockeyed around too. So, you know, some of the, I don't know, bullet points here, I've totally, you know, I don't kind of agree with. Existing setup for public circulation. I mean, I can go on and on with this. I mean, this is something that I was hoping that the accreditation process and some of these other proposals that we've proposed in order to review some of these things would answer some of these questions. And, you know, it becomes a wish list again. And, you know, it's kind of frustrating to me that, you know, it's kind of like we're singing from the same sheet of music. So thank you, Jim. You know, these are priorities that our 3 to 5 year plan that, you know, the chief has, you know, put his input here. And I'd like, you know, the new chief and his or her staff to give me some input as to see if these are reasonable or not.
Okay.
Thank you.
Let's go to item 2 there, Chief.
Jim, yeah, I will. So one last thing, just for clarification though, on the shop facility, that was a priority and now it's a project. I think that's the differentiation, meaning you've allocated funds for it. We're actively out getting bids for the work. And so that's, you know, that's a little bit different than what we're doing today, which is, you know, trying to align what order going forward we would be in. So what I gather is the majority are in favor of Station 1 being the highest capital improvement facility project. And when I say facility, whole station, whole complex at this point. But I understand that those other two, specifically, like I said, the shop is a project. That's where we've moved it. It's budgeted. You know, we're actively getting bids to do the work. So that's going to happen because you authorize that.
You used the word complex, and I need you to define that because I don't know.
Yeah, so more than one thing. I use complex because if we were building Station 2 or 4, well, maybe Station 6 because of the other buildings that were there, moving the museum and other things over. But you know, where it has more than one function other than a fire station, right? So
right.
yeah,
but I think that's a departure from when we were talking about item 1. I know it is for me. You know, I limited my comments to Fire Station 1, meaning just that operating firehouse.
Okay.
And then I separate that from the larger complex that would include a classroom, a training tower, other training facilities, parking facilities. I regard all of that in aggregate to be the complex.
Well, it's good, and that's good to know because I think when I look at it, I include it all as one, but I think if all the board members agree, you know, maybe that's a differentiation that at least needs to be stated.
I think that goes into item number 2 then, you know, what is the phased development of the complex, right, including all the facilities and all the various functions that might exist at that site.
Yeah, and I agree. I think, you know, we wrote that, we thought phasing of the 3 primary functions, but what I'm hearing today is that there may be more, right? Or there may be less, or those things may be moved. So the training tower, the classroom, or those other 2 pieces, the classroom is obviously the boardroom as well. And that building would have some storage, could have an EOC as was written in the space needs assessment, but that's all up to the board. So, you know, if you wanted to go around on that one, maybe that is the clarifying point there, what people think should be or could be or need to be looked at. Because I think that's something staff needs to know so we can, you know, do some of that work.
Well, I think, you know, that first go around focusing on item number 1, you know, I think there was a consensus that the operating fire station is a primary need. And now we get into, you know, the rest of the complex and, you know, should it be broken into phases? Right. I think that's the question before us. You know, do we lump or do we put all of this into a single phase that includes the fire station and all the other functions? or, should it be, should all these various functions be done in a phased manner?
Yeah, and another space needs assessment identified that if you did it all at once, I mean, you're looking, and again, this is an estimate, who knows what it really is today. You were looking at something around $60 million to do everything.
Right. So I'll just, I'll get the ball rolling here. For me, yes, this should be a phased project that, you've outlined those 4 phases there. And I don't think we're prepared or should try to address each one of those phases. Those are 4 possible phases. But yes, I think, and that becomes the task before us. What do we want on this complex? Do we want an admin facility? What should the training, facility look like at the site and whatnot? And I think that is, the pick and shovel work, going forward. So those are my thoughts. So anybody else want to speak to number 2? Chuck?
Well, I think another way of maybe saying what you said is that when people said, let me say, when I said station 1, I was talking about number 6 here, phase 4, the main fire station. That's all I was talking about. I think these things do need to be separated. Whether they're all done together, that's down the road. But I think the decisions about them should be made separately. We're not prepared today to bite off a $60 million project. And if that means that we won't get to address the property of Station 77, then yeah, no, I'm not for Station 1. But so I think let's just, when we say Station 1, let's just mean the fire station itself, a $10 million project, period. And then deal with the other things separately.
All right. Anybody else have any thoughts or comments on item 2 there? Robert?
Yes. I think it's hard to separate in development. It's hard to, I think if my understanding is what I'm hearing or thinking, that there are 5 phases, which are 5 different areas of functionality of the total site of Fire Station 1, the whole site. Each one of these are, in construction terms, can be built at different points in time of completion of the previous phase of construction. But it's important to know what phases are in terms of priority based upon how critical it is to the overall function or perceived function of Station 1. We don't want to build classrooms. I think the classrooms should not be moved ahead of just actually building the building for the engines themselves. And what happened is it's about staging. If you start in one area, it's about staging the other pieces of the area, and whether you're going to do the excavation, do the grading, everything has an order to it. And I think that being able to deliver this to the contractor who's going to be working on this, along with the architect, they can, I mean, and based on whatever input the board feel like it needs to make in terms of stating which one of these areas that should go first, if we want to get that level of detail. But if the functionality is what of the site is, and prioritizing that functionality, that to me is more important than trying to understand whether we're going to build classrooms or not. I think that's where the architect would come into play to find the best place, a location for our classroom, if that's what is part of what's in that in that top 4 phases. So that's, I think we really need to focus in on saying, yes, these are the areas which we want to see incorporated into a design for Station 1. Then to say move forward and say that is maybe number 2. That's the second priority we are looking for, or maybe the first. I don't know, but But whatever it is, I think we just need to give that that architect or the developer, this is what we want, and phase it out for us, and which is the best for construction in terms of getting the project done.
Right, Virginia?
Yeah, so maybe I'm probably the lone person, the lone board member, and looking at the main fire station. I always thought that if you look at the utility of the station and what it could be as a training tower as well, that was like one, I don't want to say one phase per se, but it would be one building, if you will, that we could do in different phases. So, for me, if we were going to prioritize this in terms of phases, I almost would look at, the main fire station and, the actual use of a station is, main fire station A and then main fire station B, which would be the training tower thing, that whole area. I just want to address Chuck's thing for Station 77 and the property, unless there's going to be a major market change, which could happen. We have a 55-year lease for that. And as much as I would like to own the property that Station 77 sits on right now, I do think that the main fire station, Station 1, is important to make as the high priority. So I don't know, in terms of, by not doing something with Station 77 property, what harm does that cause us? And I don't know, right? But we have a 55-year lease with the city of Menlo Park for that. So that's probably why it's not as high of a priority. It doesn't mean it's not a priority. I just don't think it's as high of a priority. But getting back to the main fire station, I do think that the training tower has to somehow be attached to that main fire station. Then A is the fire station part, and B would be the training tower part. Just because it's like I said, it's used so much, and it's an important facility for our firefighters.
I would suggest that we've gone about as far as we can on this list. I think when we get below, those first couple items, each one of those issues, poses a vast amount of analysis that needs to go on um, uh, in each one of those. So those are my thoughts. Chuck, I think you had some comments.
Well, I want to say something that I don't know to be true, but I just wanted to say something here that actually colors my thinking about this in part, and it may color the board's decision. When I contacted Drew Combs about the joint meeting that we had and discussed the priorities for discussion, I mentioned talking about the development of the site that Station 1 is on. And I talked about the various things that had been discussed. I wasn't lobbying him or arguing for them. I just saying these are things that the board has talked about. When I mentioned the training facility and so forth, he told me that there was no, this is his words, not mine. There's no way a 5-story or 7-story or whatever it is training facility is going to go on that property. Neighbors don't want it, and so forth. And I'm just saying this because, I mean, if the board doesn't want it, then it doesn't matter anyway. But if the board does want it, or if that's a condition for even remodeling Station 1, maybe that's something we should get rid of as an issue right away, because we don't want to proceed under the, with the notion that the training tower will be there if that's not going to be permitted.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you, Chuck. I think, again, I think several of these fall in that same category. There are some threshold questions that have to be answered. We have a 90-foot, structure there now. I don't know, would the city grandfather it in? And before we invest a lot of time and effort and engage a designer or architect and incur those expenses, I think there's some threshold, issues associated with that we need to know. And one is, would the city, do they have the authority to block it? Would they permit it? What would that process look like? I think that's kind of fundamental, before we go any further on that issue.
And Jim,
Yeah, that's helpful. I didn't know that. Thanks, Chuck.
well,
Did I miss
to
Harold,
address
and then Robert.
yeah, to address that, John Hitchcock's on tonight, but some of that work was done back in 2018 with WLC Architects. And I understand, Drew Combs, the mayor, and he's a council member, but under the building code and what you can build, and I'm not saying that would be popular with the neighbors or whatever, but we're on an existing property that has that function. So maybe John could speak to that, because the architect already worked on this, as you can see, back in 18, and the city, I believe, was approached as to what could be put there and zoning and all the other things. And so some of that work was done. I'm not saying that individual council members can't have their preference or say that you can't do something, but I don't think that's holding true with our discussions with the building department and planning. But we didn't go all the way. So, I don't want to speak out of school, but maybe John could be asked that question, because he's worked more closely with the city and the architects at that point, to at least give you a sense of what can be done.
I see John. Yeah, John, can you speak to that?
Unfortunately, I picked an inopportune time to use the restroom. Can you repeat the question?
Hey, John, one of the things that the mayor currently has said is that he doesn't think we can build a training site here, or the neighborhood wouldn't support it. But I think that doesn't hold true with the discussions we had with the city and what the architect was able to look into back in 2018. Now, certainly, that's always an issue, is planning and building, and what the neighbors want or wouldn't want. But I think, from the work you did already with WLC and the city, what have they said to you at that kind of operational level?
Sure. Myself, including training and fire prevention, met with the city, and we discussed the original design by WLC Architects and presented that to the planning and building department. And based off of their discussions, they didn't object to us constructing a new training facility at the site. They also did not object to us building a training tower as tall as our current training tower. The only negative comment that we received at the time was the massing of the structure in that design. It was I believe a 40 by 70 rectangular building going all the way up 5 stories. And so they preferred to have a more tiered approach. They thought that would be a more acceptable building that the community would accept.
And also, John, real quick, since you're on the parking and then the placement of a new tower based upon where we put it, not just from a functional standpoint of a 360, but to this, this discussion about phasing the project if we were to do it with the site build out, and how far away it was from Middlefield and Santa Monica. I know there was some logic behind that, right? So you couldn't see it necessarily as easy from either street. And then the parking, as we gave the board with the numbers, all that was relative too, right? That was all discussed with the city about parking spaces, because I know that's a big thing for them, and people not parking out on the street, right?
Correct. I've been talking with them this past week about parking in a little bit more detail. Unfortunately, they are not able to give us a direct response on how much parking would be required. They referenced that they have different parking requirements based off of different zoning districts. The clearest response I received is that they would require 1 parking space per every 200 square feet of office space. With that said, that question was more directed toward if we decided to build a new classroom / boardroom, if we decided to build an EOC, how much parking would that be? How much parking would be required? In the table I provided, I indicated 25 spaces would be required. Doing the calculation, if we did both an EOC and a classroom, it looks like 21 spaces may be required. So that number holds pretty true to what we're thinking. However, the city basically has reserved the right to provide a different response when we actually submit a project. In regards to phasing, it's important to understand that if we decide today, well, not today, but if we decide we want to do the fire station and we design that and we don't start designing the rest of the site, it could potentially have a negative impact on what we want to do in the future. Placement of each of the structures is extremely important, and we don't want to lose sight of that. You can definitely phase going out to bid for pieces of those construction projects. So if you want to do the fire station first, that's totally fine. You can do that with one general contractor. And then if you decide you want to do the classroom next, that can be with a different general contractor. Or you could bid it out under one general contractor, but to be phased. So there's a lot of different options that can be done. The last thing on the phasing, the city is going to require us to submit the entire site as a project in order for them to be able to calculate whether or not we are going to be providing enough parking. As long if we're going to be providing enough access to the site, they were going to want to see everything. So just keep that in the back of your mind when we start talking about phasing. If we try to take a small piece of this project to them, they may turn around and say, that's not acceptable. You guys need to come back and give us more information. They've done that to us already once when we first started having these discussions many years ago.
Well, and that's the reason too, if, you know, for the supplemental that was sent to the board, you see the three pieces all as one, because we needed to also make sure that, for example, if we're going to build a drive-through fire station, that the classroom wasn't in the way, or the old classroom wasn't in the way, or that the training tower, if we were to build that, you know, again, as John mentioned, phases that would be able to be a 360. You know, all of the site had to fit together. So again, some of that work was done. When you see it in that drawing, all three pieces were, I guess, in concert with one another. Director Jones raised a point earlier, which I thought was a good one, because, you know, if you were to plop on the existing buildings, there would be some demolition that would need to occur. For example, if you built the training tower to the classroom facility / workout room, you could actually probably have to take part of that building down to be able to accomplish that and let the rest of it run. So, you know, those are the things we have to look at. It's not as if there's nothing on the site. John's point about tearing down the station first kind of puts you in an awkward spot, because that would be something that when, you know, now you don't have that 90-foot tower anymore, could the city come back and say, well, wait a minute, how come what do you mean you want to build a 75-foot training tower? You know, so what Director Bernstein said, and one council member, that doesn't hold true with what we've been talking to the city about. And that may be his own opinion, and I don't mean Chuck, but Drew, but that is not, you know, in line with the actual planning, building department background that we spent a lot of time already doing. And again, we did hire WLC back in 2018 and spent a lot of time doing some of this base work already. So, you know, I don't want you to think that there isn't an investment. What you see, what I sent you, is only a fraction of some of the work that we've received back from the architect. There's a lot more detail that the city required us to at least give them conceptually for the site. So a lot of work was done already towards that end.
Robert?
Yes, I have two questions, line of questions, not question, but comment for the most part. The first, if you focus back on to the 16 items, to me, the first 6 items are strictly around development in terms of, you know, what type of development we're going to have. The next item, number 7, 8, and 9, are more political in nature. And when I say political in nature, I'm referring to it looks like it's requiring getting agreement from other entities, whether one is this would be our primary training facility, or whether other place be set up somewhere else at another fire station or just somewhere else for that regional training facility. I mean, we got to get agreement from every people in the region, other fire districts are going to in the region, and see if that's possible. And should the site be used to support joint training with law enforcement? That again, I think there was a relationship building that. And for me, I think just putting that to the side in a second pot. Pot one is the development, which is the first 6 items. And then from item number 10 down to 13, to me, those are all development related issues, and that should go into the pot of development. And then the item number 14 is political in nature. To me, is about the water well. We have got to get some agreement on that. And then the last item number 15 is development related. So to me, I think it seems as if we can segment these 2 items and concentrate on the development aspect of it. Yes, I know that saying that law enforcement is going to be should they be part of some type of joint training exercise, and then maybe that might impact the facility. I don't know, but I think that if that doesn't happen, all that political stuff doesn't happen, can we still move forward with our development as it is? There are nice things to have, and then there's practical things we need to have. And I think moving towards those practical things is going to be so important for us not to continue to be delayed 20 years from now, still wondering whether law enforcement from somewhere is going to come into play. The second thing that I want to just throw out there, seeing a moment again. Anyway, I don't forget what it was. I'll just leave it there and hopefully come back.
Rob?
Yeah, Robert made great points here, where some of these things are kind of out of our control. Robert, did you mention 15 or 14?
I mentioned 14 was more of a political issue,
Right.
And then 15 is more development. Do we add the LRAD setup and capability in our building? That's within our control.
Right.
I think.
And I would like to add to that is, when we're looking at that, we should have the cooperation and the coordination with the county and the other communities we serve, the other cities, and of course the town of Atherton, relative to how we're going to do that, and have those coordinated with the surrounding communities too. So, Robert, great point. Thank you.
I'd like to suggest something. I think, central to our discussion today and in previous discussions we've had about developing the complex at the Station 1 site, it is a training tower. And is that where the training facility is? Listening to John Hitchcock, there's the planning commission, they have their role. There's the city council, they have their role. And then there's state regulations that may come into play. There's CEQA. There's a lot of moving parts to that. And that's before anybody's done any kind of a public hearing. What happens to the idea when it's exposed to the public? When the current structure was built, there was a lot of green field around, Station 1. That's just not the case anymore. So I think before we can even have a meaningful discussion about a training facility, we need to know, is that a deal breaker? Is a 70-foot tall training structure, is it feasible? Is it possible? Is it acceptable to the community, to that neighbor? When I say the community, I really mean the neighborhood, surrounding Station 1. I think those are all kind of fundamental threshold questions that need to be addressed. And I think, what is the process? What are all the factors that have to be considered? And I think we're into the legal realm now. So whether it's Stephen Miller or the fellow Colatrano that we've used up in Grass Valley, to outline the process for us, I think, again, in order for us to have a meaningful conversation, we have to take all of those factors into account and know where we stand to even know what's possible.
Jim, I think it's an excellent point. As John said, the good news for us is we have a training center there, right? So that's the city has not, at least when I say the city staff has not balked at putting a training center there again, but that's only because there is one. And then of course they don't want it larger than what exists now. So, the massing and so forth. But if you don't mind, because I know also in the wings waiting is Chief Ellis, who runs training. And I would say, I understand what Director Bernstein has said, maybe what Councilmember Combs has said, but I have a little bit different take on what I hear from the neighbors. I've heard when I was a training chief together, people like stopping by and watch the firefighters train. They like having us there. Now, do they like us responding down the street? No, they've never liked us responding down the street. So we always had to be careful to come in off of Middlefield and so forth and work with the neighborhood, really not try to penetrate into it on responses and so forth. But from the training side, I've always heard great things from people that are there. So, I see Todd's on the line. If he can unmute himself, maybe he could talk about what he hears, and then also why it's such a critical spot for us, and what we're trying to do there. Because I think that's one of those. And again, whether you build it there or somewhere else, although he would probably argue there, why it's so important. So if you don't mind, maybe let him have a few minutes. So,
Or Todd, do you want to share your thoughts with us
Sure.
on those issues?
Yeah, good evening, directors. So, yeah, the neighbors are a concern, but one of the things we have going for us here is that 3 sides of any structure basically face St. Pat's and the fire station. So you're only talking about, one side. And I have the notes that John made when we went to the city in 2018, and it says that public notification is 300-foot radius from the project site. So not to say that other members of the community wouldn't have their, their input, but it really directly affects a relatively small amount of people given Menlo Park. And then we're in the center of the district. We've talked about that before. Being right in the middle not only is convenient for bringing, rigs in from the east side and the west side, but it also makes it so if something happens, if there's an earthquake, whatever happens, all of our resources are centrally located and we can quickly put them back into service. That's what's good for us as Menlo Park, because everything's here, we can put everybody back to work right away. If we go somewhere else, we are decentralized and it takes us time to respond to any kind of emergency. We have a pretty good relationship with the people, not everybody. Sometimes people come down, but we have people that generally walk up and down the street every day that live here, that stop with their kids every day to watch and see what training. They ask us what our training schedule is, when they can come back and watch. And I try to give them, hey, on Thursday, we're going to be doing this. That'll probably be fun for the kids to watch, that kind of thing. So I'm not going to say everybody would favor it, obviously, but I feel like we do have a fair amount of support in the local neighborhood because they walk by all the time.
hey, Todd, on functionality, can you just go through that? Because I know you put the list. And again, I know there's, the number of new personnel that we have, because we talk about how much time is needing to be spent, on each of them, right? And why that site's important, why that structure is important.
Yeah, well, especially with getting this, having the current tower looked at today, if we lose that, like as far as functionality, then we're really going to be in a tough spot because we can do certain things out at the training site, but not everything. And there's not a water supply out there. And remember, we only do a 5-year contract from every 5 years for that site we have out there. Even though it's great, we could lose it really at any time. So having something that's our own in our own district is kind of essential. And if we lost even what we had right now, because we have 2 fire hydrants we have access to, we have a drill ground, and I don't know where else we're going to get that kind of land and area to do it. And yeah, having it centrally located is a nice piece of it. If it was somewhere on the east side, I don't know where that'd be, that would still be, we could still make that work, but we still need a home base training ground to train all our people in. Right now we have the academy going with 8 of our own people that we have here most of the time during the academy split. And a lot of that time we're out in the drill yard. Next week, we'll be doing company performance standards, and we bring everybody into the drill ground and we use what we have. but there's a lot of limitations on what we have because it's an old building. We make do, we build side props, we kind of do what we can, but ultimately we're going to need, if it's not here, we need some kind of a long-term solution for training for the fire district.
Can you talk about the newer firefighters, Todd? Because I know that's the the time on task versus the experience level versus just the mandated stuff that you need to do every year with everybody.
Well, in general, as you know, we'd call it high risk, low frequency. In general, as we have less fires and we have less, dangerous calls, the training becomes inherently more valuable because now you're trying to simulate as best you can real emergencies, but have high risk and carry high danger. So the better training you can do, the more lifelike, the more realistic, the more hours you can get in, the better trained all of the firefighters are to actually go on their calls because they're not seeing them every day like they had at some point in the past. So the better the training, the more safe the firefighters are, the more safe the community is. That's kind of how it all goes together.
All
I
right.
see Director Solano has.
Yeah,
Rob
thank you
got a
for
hand
that.
up.
Rob, did you have a comment or question?
Yeah, I just, I just want to go on record and say that, Todd, I'm very supportive of the training function that the fire district puts on. There are some things that I like to see that are more cost effective with the way that San Mateo County does the training. And I know there's some agreements that are in place that prohibit that, like a centralized academy, the way law enforcement has. But, those are things that, I see here in some of these bullet points that they talk about us taking the lead as the actual, when we're talking about, should it be used as a regional training facility, joint training with law enforcement, district's primary training facilities, as Robert said, those are a lot of things that are political in nature. And maybe us as a board need to step in and work with these other counties, other cities, the fire districts that are within our county, and of course ourselves, and try to come up with some cost-effective method of centralized training where we as a fire district don't incur all the financial burden and build a great training facility and they don't pay for any of it. So with that said, what Chuck brought up, where one of the council members are against it, that sets a red flag up to me. And that concerns me because, the training function, as you said, Todd, is so important to us. So that concerns me, Jim. So that's all I have to say. Thanks.
All right. Well, again, I don't think it's possible for us to move forward past this point. I think there's, again, as I expressed, and I think, maybe there's an opportunity for us to do that now, but, what are the considerations in locating a training tower at that facility? I'm not sure that we know. Are there some poison pills in there, either from the community side or does the city council have the authority to overrule the planning? Even if the planning commission were to approve it, does the city council have the authority to overturn that? I don't know. But I think before we can have a meaningful discussion, I think, all of those pieces need to be addressed. Should there be should we survey the surrounding neighborhoods? Do we do hey, there'll be live, there'll be smoke, there'll be noise, there'll be, outline, truthfully, honestly, forthcoming, what that means to have that in the neighborhood, present that to the neighbors. And even after you do all that, Could somebody get an injunction against its use? Could we make a huge investment only to have, to be injuncted against using it? I don't know, but I think all of those kinds of issues need to be addressed. And then that will drive a lot of other decisions. Is that the best place for the training facility? Can we have it there? And then what does it look like? That'll guide the development of that complex. Those are my thoughts. Chuck?
I wanted to ask the chief a question, and then I have a comment. Chief, where, for example, would Woodside Fire and Redwood City Fire, what do they use for a training tower?
I'll let Todd answer that because I don't believe either one has a training facility or a training tower.
They don't. When we do South Zone training, they'll come out. They do quite a bit of things with us because we have the facilities. They have certain stations where they have stairwells that they can use, but by and large, it's all about who has the means to build, a training center and the land to build a training center. And while us having one would certainly benefit the South, a regional training center in the middle of the county benefits the middle of the county. And if it's all we had, it would be okay, but it doesn't really benefit the South because we have to travel and be out of our district to be there. So that's pretty much the long and short of that.
Okay, well, that was my comment relates to something that Robert had said earlier and that Rob just said a minute ago, and that is, I agree with Robert that the decisions he pointed out as being political are certainly political questions, but I think when they were discussed, certainly when they were discussed at some of the committee meetings I attended, they were discussed with the idea that they could be a way of financing this. In other words, if it became a regional facility, that everyone would chip in a couple, this thing's the tower itself is gonna cost roughly $7 million or something. If everybody chipped in a couple $1 million, well, that helps. So part of it was paying, and that's a very difficult political thing because everybody wants to borrow it and no one wants to pay for it. And the question is the fire district so rich that it should have these regional facilities and let everyone use them for free, or should they be paid for, or should people chip in and buy them, help pay for them in the first place? Anyway, I think that there's more that it is political, but it also involves money and how we're going to pay for all this stuff. So.
Robert, did you have a comment?
Yes, two things, two comments. The first, I think one, something you said, Jim, you posed a lot of questions, and it was regarding that once our plans go to city council, will the city council, reject our plans, and so I sensed that there was a sense of really apprehension about getting the ducks lined up before you go in to the planning or to city council. I can tell you this in development world, you never have all your ducks. You have as many ducks as you can line up based upon your project that you got going. I've experienced that myself firsthand. Solid project, get to the community. They didn't like none of it. They didn't like the design. They didn't want folks to do it. And so I had massive protests outside my office for weeks. That typically will happen. But I think because the staff is doing such a diligent job and looking at a lot of these questions beforehand and mitigating that by looking at what we're trying to bring, it seems to me, bring forth as a concrete plan that once it gets into the meat grinders, I like to call it, where it goes to planning, all the reports, the CEQA, the EIR, and all that stuff get looked at. That when it comes back, that we pretty much know, I think, about what some of the issues might be, and some of them may not. So we know what some of those issues are. We start mitigating it now in advance of any reports coming back. But I think the fear of trying to, not the fear, but trying to get all of that and not known questions that we think may come up, mitigated first, is going to delay the project. There was one thing about that was brought up about the neighbors. You know, I think the chief, I thought I heard in subsequent and previous meeting that there is going to be an outreach, public outreach to the neighborhood surrounding the project. I mean, that would, if not, then there's prudent thing to do to be progressive and forward in getting the public engaged in a conversation about what is gonna go up in each of phase of the process, because I see this as a three public meeting process throughout the phase. One to introduce a project, another to let them know what we're already putting up, and at the end, invite them into their building, their fire station at that point in time, to get their appreciation of what has been put together. That's part of being proactive. I think that's something I think I thought we was going to do, and that would go a long way and even letting some of the critics or skeptics know in the community about, well, no, the project shouldn't go on. The fire station is already here, so it's not like, you know, it would building something different in terms of a new structure, a new use. It's already here. It's just a matter of educating them and getting their architectural ideas about what the colors and stuff like that should be on the project, on the building, so they feel a part of the project. And you do that by engaging. The last thing I'm going to talk about in terms of training tower is a matter of two questions on that. One, what is the, and we might have said it before, so please forgive me if I'm repeating myself. What is the current height on the training facility? Is it part of the 75 feet that a number that I heard? What is the current height on the building, the training tower?
About 90 feet to the top of the antenna.
So down to the actual structure itself, what, take another, say, would it be around 80?
I want to say, Todd, what do you think about, or John would know for sure. I think it's 75.
I
John,
think
what's
it's 70, around 70 feet. We, in our last design that we did, we ended up coming in a couple inches shorter than our tower. Not talking about the antenna, the actual structural part of it.
Let's say 70, if it was around between 70 and 75 feet, just for the actual structure itself. So I think I heard a concern that about, you know, well, this building be 75 feet and they may not like, well, currently our building is at that height already. So we're not changing the use of the building. We're not increasing the height of the building. I can see the worry being if we're going to go from current around 70 feet or 75 feet up to 80 feet. You know, I could see the people marching in the streets at that point in time, and the planning commission saying, no, exceeding where our vision of height is. But we're only going to enhance the structure, the physical structure of the building itself, that taking it from where it is right now to a little more updated, modern, painted facility. So to me, I don't see where that would be much of a barnstorming type of, but you know, I have been wrong in the past. But what I'm saying is those are the kind of things that I think we should just put into let the process go, knowing the fact that we fall within the limits that's already been sanctioned for the fire district at this point. Okay, I'm done.
Robert, Jim, can I address the first part of what Robert said? So just so you know, when we bought the property behind us from St. Pat's, we did walk, and I've walked when I was walking. We did walk the neighborhood in years past as we were proposing to build, you know, then on just the existing lot. Don't forget, you know, and Todd mentioned this, it's actually on 4 sides that you have, you know, in Santa Monica, you have a commercial building next door, right, with an extensive parking lot to the rear of it. So your first residential structure is within the footprint or the new footprint of the land we acquired from St. Patrick's Seminary, but that's it. You literally end at the edge of that first lot of the house on Santa Monica. And then as you go down the street, remember, it's all empty land, and then there's only houses on the right side. So, you know, when I've walked, I've gone as far down as Gilbert, but you know, you end up with the Vintage Oaks is the new stuff that's, you know, built into what was St. Patrick's Seminary before. I think it was about 75. if you added that, 75 residential structures at a fairly far distance. You know, when we did 2 and when we did 6, you know, at 6 for sure, I walked all the neighborhood. I was surprised how many rentals there were. But we have walked, you know, each one of these projects beforehand and put out notices. We didn't wait for the city to do that. We just put out, here's what we're planning to do. If you got any concerns, you know, suggestions, let us know. And very little feedback, but I got to tell you, most people were positive and they appreciated that we reached out to them first. So, you know, I would suggest, you know, again, I won't be around, but I would suggest doing that same thing, being more proactive than letting people be reactive, hearing it from somebody else, because I think you might be surprised at the support that we have. And I'm not just trying to be, you know, the optimist, although I tend to be that. But, you know, I think there is support for this facility. And I think there's support for a lot of reasons. You know, I got to tell you, when we brought back the night show a few years ago, oh my gosh, I couldn't believe the positive support that we got because people grew up with us doing that annually. And that thing goes back to the 1930s. So, you know, maybe that's a strategy too, you know, fix the tower we have to a point and bring back events like that where the community is engaged there. Don't forget, we still do the pancake breakfast and we do the open house and we do all the great stuff that brings people from the neighborhood in, you know, the car show out in the street and so forth. So, you know, I think there's a way to highlight the best of ourselves and to promote, you know, why it's so important that this be there and that be the type of structures that we update. Because that's really all we're doing is updating. Yeah, it's bigger, but you know, look, even Todd will tell you, and we didn't get into the, you know, granular detail of the massing and so forth, but there's ways to make all these things work. You know, you can scale it smaller as you go up. John Hitchcock and I have talked about that because then that doesn't look as big from a distance and so forth. So, you know, there's a lot of ways to do it and to do it maybe slightly differently, but to have people feel positive about doing it. But, you know, community outreach, I'm always leery when I hear, oh, somebody doesn't like something. Well, did they not like it? Or maybe one person said something. But, you know, then go out and kind of do your own polling and see what those people actually say, because I'm not sure that that's what they would say. I think they actually probably would say good things. I hope, I believe that's what would happen.
Chuck, I see you.
I wanted to ask the chief if it was possible. I don't know what we explored when we looked at this, but the thing that was the 40 by 70, I mean, that's 2,800 square feet. That's a very big footprint. Is it possible for us to build literally just a tower of the same dimensions that we have?
I'm going to let Todd answer that because Todd spent the most time researching, you know, what was needed, again, for functional reasons, right? And I give you a little bit of that, but I think he's again, I won't be here in a month. So, you know, he's the best one for the long haul because he'll be here for a long time and hopefully see this thing through to give you that answer.
Yeah, so Director, we looked into, when we first started this project, I was going to be the lead chair, and we put together a group of firefighters. And at that time, we didn't have a budget. It was like, what's the budget? Well, what would we like? What do we need? What don't we have access to now? And we came up, there was 5 of us in the committee, and we came up with a list of all the things we didn't have. So we made, you know, ultimately, here's our wish list. Here's all the things that we don't have that we can do right now. And here's all the props we would like. Are some of those nice to haves and not need to have? Absolutely. Based on, you know, whatever our size limits are and budgetary, you know, sizes, we'll have to kind of pick and choose and go through and go, okay, well, you know, what of these things can we give up? But at a certain point, building something we have now that's still not functional for a lot of the things we do, because building construction has changed. So the layout of buildings is different. So there's a lot of new things that we want to incorporate that didn't exist when you built a training tower, you know, 50 years ago. So this incorporated center hallway construction, 2.5-inch hose management, a bunch of new technology that's out there right now for training that takes up different space and size. There's firefighter survival stuff that didn't exist before with below ground props and underground confined space rescue. We've made a lot of technological like classes that made it better over the years, and it takes specific kinds of training props in order to be proficient at those should we have to do them. So yes, there's things we could take out, but when we start talking about 2.5-inch hose, which is one of the things we carry, we need for larger structures. We have almost nowhere to train on that because you need stairwells with standpipes to simulate apartment fires. And we don't have any place to do that. Like every time we do that training, we're faking it with pieces of plywood going down a hall. There's many things that we need to be better at that we don't have a place to train on, to answer your question.
So I'm interpreting your answer to mean you didn't really address the question of whether we could build a tower, but what you're saying is a tower would not be sufficient to meet the training needs.
Right. In order to address the needs that we need the most, the things we can't do, that we don't have a place to do, some of those require a longer hallway type thing with stairwells, with standpipes inside stairwells, and learning how to flake out hose inside modern stairwells, and then the size they're built. Some of the fire suppression systems, there's other things there. If we had to really, chop this down to what are the things we absolutely need, but I'd do that by committee again and kind of figure out, okay, well, here's our limitations. What can we build that's still useful to us? Yes, it's not going to be all the things we want, but it'll at least address some of our major needs. But we would need some kind of direction on budget and footprint.
And don't forget, the reason, and again, Todd, maybe talk to this, the 360 access and to some extent the height, the district is, it's growing in elevation with multi-story structures. So, the ladder trucks being around the building, being able to use the aerials, but also the ground ladders. And Todd mentioned a real critical skill, which is the hose lines, going more than one floor above or even 2 or 3. And even 4 and 5, but that type of work, the last 2 major fires that we had in, for example, like Redwood City, those apartment complexes, that had a lot of hose management and elevated work that we haven't seen in a while. But you don't forget, just because it happened in Redwood City, we have apartment complexes in East Palo Alto. Not too far, from the district. There's a lot, or from the Station 1, there's a lot of different apartment complexes up in Sharon Heights and so forth, where all this stuff comes into play.
I just want to interject. I just want to interject at this point, and perhaps I wasn't clear. I don't presume that isn't community support. I don't presume that the planning department or the city council would favor or oppose this. I make no presumption there, but again, what I'm advocating for is developing a critical path. What are the necessary elements, planning elements, approval, regulatory elements connected to this? Just creating that inventory of what is required for us to realize, what is in our best interest at that site. I'm not sure that we know right now, and I don't know how I think our conversations or discussions going forward need to be informed by that critical path.
Let me suggest, because, again, I think those are great questions. And I think, John Hitchcock is the perfect person to get you some of those answers.
Well, but again, I'm not asking, I'm not asking for answers at this point. I'm asking for the development of an inventory of those issues. And we're just talking about the training tower. There's the water well issue. There's the whole issue of whether or not we site our headquarters facility there, and what kind of density will that site support. So I mean, all of those various planning elements, I think we need to have an inventory of those so that it will inform our discussion going forward. Virginia?
So Jim, are you saying just to understand the public process a little better and what we need to do to get our ducks in a row? I mean, because I think that and I might be wrong, Harold, because this is not a new topic that we have, we've seen previous documents over the years. I remember, for example, like when we did that presentation for the well, right, with the city of Menlo Park. Was it Chip who came to that meeting?
Correct, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so Jim, it's possible that I don't want to reinvent the wheel. It's possible that we have these, but I don't know if they're gonna answer your questions. So I don't know. I mean, is there a way, Harold, to put all of these documents on about these issues that Jim's concerned about? And I agree with him that, maybe we all need a refresher in what the process is, that where we can have one repository of these documents.
I think that's all possible, and I think that's
I think
good.
that might help you a little bit, Jim, and then we can go and see what we need from there, right? Because some of these things happen, I don't even know how long, probably over the last 8 years or something like that,
And
right?
Todd actually said it. So between John Johnston, the fire marshal, Todd is now the training chief, and John Hitchcock, who's basically our facilities expert. I'm going to give him that nice title. The three of them, and it's not me, the fire chief. I'm kind of the last guy, but I mean, and whoever your fire chief is probably not going to have that granular knowledge. But they have a lot of background, like they've said, working together and working on this project for a long time. So I think if, bringing all that list that I've heard so far, because there is a list. I mean, I'm listening to what you're saying. What do we have? What's been done? What other documents would you need to see, or processes that you should be aware of that we've already engaged in? Because we've spent money on this project already, right? We spent $6 million to buy a piece of land, an acre of land.
Right.
So a lot has been done. And I think giving you that inventory of what's been done and addressing, I think, some of the questions here, hopefully that's maybe a good next step. And then what comes after that, I think, then again, you need to have that discussion. And I think it's going to take us, I mean, that's not a 2-week away thing. That's, these guys will probably need a month or so. But then you should, get into that. What's your timetable? And I don't think you need to have that tonight either. I think, we've had a good discussion. I know we're coming up on the 2 hours. We've had a good discussion just about, what's the path forward. Here's what I hear. Definitely want to have a fire station there, majority of the board members. 2, want to look at other options, right? What else could we do, could be done? So take a look at that. Maybe some level of space needs, although maybe not a formalized report, but I think you'll have to look at that. And then for the existing site, what's the inventory of what's been done already? Provide that information, maybe the list and so forth. And that should help hopefully answer to sequencing and the next step, what you can do going forward. And I just add one thing. I don't think it ever hurts to talk to the neighbors. I have always enjoyed doing it. I know some people don't like doing it. I like doing it, but I'm not gonna be around. I think that's a good step. I think talking to the neighbors, letting them know that we're starting to move forward on Station 1, including them, whether you get their emails or whatever it's gonna be, is always helpful. When we did 6, I was amazed at how much support we had. And we actually turned one of the neighbors, who was probably the most negative, but supportive, into an advocate, and loves the new building. Everybody on that street loved what we came up with, and a lot of them were there for the groundbreaking, and they were there for the ribbon cutting. And I think if some of the board members remember, the comments that people made was like they couldn't believe how nice it turned out. So I think, with that, we're lucky. We can we'll hopefully be able to show 3 other great examples of what we build and how we include everybody, but we do nice things. And there's a lot of patience and time spent to make sure we do it right. So I think getting neighborhood support, talking to the council members, maybe Drew Combs has never been over to see a training. Maybe he doesn't know what a training looks like. The first thing I thought of was, take a naysayer and make him an advocate. I mean, if you put him with Todd, let him see what we do and see how important that is to functionally, how we operate, and that we actually have a site there. Maybe he's never even been there. I don't know.
In his neighborhood.
Yeah, I don't know.
Chuck?
Look, I want to second the idea of talking with the neighbors. I mean, I think it's absolutely essential, and I think it's essential in Menlo Park. But I think it would be a mistake to talk to them about plans that aren't firmed up yet, because that also is the time that people start forming their impressions of what's happening, and you'll live with that even if you decide not to do some part of it. So I think it's premature at this point in any case. The other thing I was going to say about that is that that is, we're district wide now, and I believe that's Drew's district, if I'm not mistaken. So this is
Yeah.
something that we have to be very, very careful about. And I think there's some work that should be done by Todd, for example, in terms of knowing what's the minimum possible. You don't have to advertise it. You don't even have to tell it to the board. But, you know, if they said, well, you could build a 3-story building, the question is, that would that kill the plans and we have to start over, or could that actually work? And I think you need to, you know, convene your committee or whatever and start understanding what's the lowest you could tolerate. And if you don't get that, then we abandon that plan we've got and move forward. And to answer Jim's question, we're not going to have an answer on any of this because planning can't give an answer. They're not empowered to give an answer. It's a political process, and we're playing a little game calling this a tower because it's not a tower. It's a building that's a 3,000 square foot footprint, and that's not the same as a little tower. And I understand Todd's rationale for saying, well, we don't want to build a tower, but calling it a tower when it's a building is not. These people are too smart. I mean, and we're not going to get away with that. So we ought to know kind of what's the bottom line. At what point do we abandon plan A and go to plan B and move the training out to the warehouse or out to station 77 or something of that sort? Again, you don't have to publicize it. You probably don't even want to be talking about it as a general thing that's going to get in the newspaper, but you ought to know what that is, because when the time comes, we're going to have to decide yes or no very quickly. I'm talking about maybe with 15 minutes of notice or half an hour of notice or a week of notice, but we have to know what we could live with. So I think it's a mistake to go out and talk to the public right now about a 5-story, 14,000 square foot building.
Director Bernstein, just so you know, the term training tower is just kind of a universal like jargon among the industry. It doesn't matter how big they are. Usually it's just referred to as a training tower, unless it's multiple buildings, in which case it becomes a training center.
Okay.
All right.
And Jim, one last thing on that. So Chuck, I'm going to respectfully disagree only from the standpoint that even if you go out and collect emails, then you can at least have direct contact. I think people like being in that loop. Todd said it. We're not that massing, and that what they came up with was with no parameters early on. I think we would be obviously very sensitive if that's the decision to hopefully build the training tower building there. To get that feedback. And I think, the sooner you do it, look, this is a public meeting. Who knows what's going to be in the paper tomorrow, or, people want to come see this because it could affect their neighborhood. I mean, effectively the process has started, and probably started when they knew we bought the property from St. Pat's, who never sells their property. So, it's not as if the neighborhood isn't aware that something's going to happen. So I appreciate what you're saying, but I think, transparency and communications is huge, and to be ahead of it rather than behind it is always, I think, advantageous. Even if it's difficult, it's okay to have difficult discussions or people that don't agree with you, but at least if they feel like they're being communicated with, or you're engaging them, that you're listening to them, that, it's better than, trying to do something later on and then people are surprised by it, and that angers them. So the city did that, just so you know, because this is the worst example, is when they told them they were going to tear the park out and put underground water tanks down the street. That got people mad. So, that's one of those ones where you don't want to repeat that. So, my thing would be communicate early and often and honestly, right? So there you go.
Well, I don't know if we can take this discussion today any further than we have. I think you know, we've stated our sentiments about developing the site and outlined some of the tasks before us to accomplish that. And I think we're all agreed it's a long-term process. I think this could be identified or recognized as the start of that process, but it is going to be a lengthy process. So
Jim always is. Some of the early stages was a 10 and 12-year process. And hopefully this won't be that long, but
no,
yeah.
because again, I am very sensitive to the training needs. That is ongoing.
Right.
The high risk, low frequency aspect of the work is demands, requires diligence with training and whatnot. So I'm very sensitive to all that. So I hope we're not. Well, we can't let it be a 10-year process.
Right.
So
in the meantime, they'll use what they have, as Todd said, make do. But obviously, we would like better. And I think, again, what we're looking for is that assessment on that training facility currently from the structural engineer, and then you'll have that proposal for fencing, so we can at least outline what it is that we currently own and work with, at least in that envelope in the near term. But we'll get the staff going on the tangibles here. I'm glad at least we got to have the conversation before I go. These guys will carry it on, and I'm sure all the right decisions will get made along the way.
all right,
Yeah.
Rob.
Yeah, Chief, well, Todd could probably answer this. I think you did before, Todd. What's the closest training tower if we didn't have one? The train with?
There's one in Foster City, but actually, funny you should mention that. Just today, we canceled live fire. We were going to do in that tower because it's an old concrete building that pretty much is like our tower. The only difference is it's made of concrete, because they've had issues now with new businesses that have moved in the area and smoke drifting, and they've had to shut down live fire. So based on some of that, we had to cancel it. There's one out on the coast in Half Moon Bay, out of county, but you could go to Mountain View, I believe has one, and then South San Francisco has one. That's pretty much all the ones I know of.
Yeah.
And
So
Fremont.
Yeah.
Fremont across the bridge has a very nice, we looked at that last time around.
yeah. So for actual, the constant in-service training that you need to do, you'd have to take a truck out of service, and it would be out of service for a long time to travel to all these other alternative sites. Correct, Todd?
That's correct. And I don't know if the board's aware, it's not irregular to have a fire come in, to have some kind of emergency come in and cut loose engines that are there for training, because we need the manpower right now.
Yeah.
So.
No, I just wanted to get a feel for, I remember, you had talked about it before, but I just needed to refresh my memory. There are other training facilities or other training towers, but because of the distances and, actually to keep our trucks, as you just said, ready for any type of service calls to be within the immediate area. So thank you, Todd.
Hey, Rob, and to your point, I think this is maybe something we didn't say. We're not looking to do live fire at this site. We understand it's in a residential area, so we would add in the heat, we would add in the safe for vegetable smoke and venting, which is not a threat to anybody. So at the end of the day, there's things that we would do here that would make it more of a simulation versus what we do down at the rescue site where we actually do burn, but that's out along the bay, so nobody cares. So we'll continue to separate, but like Todd said, that's always on a 5-year lease, so you hope it doesn't go away.
Virginia, I see you, but Robert was up first.
Well, the comment that I want to make is that we have spent some time talking about some things, and I think we came up with some recommendations and at least directions. And so my concern is that that these recommendations and directions, and maybe we didn't come to a conclusion on them, but I think they need to be memorialized somehow in part of a working schedule of work activity that we can see that things are being moved upon or acted upon, so that if we're going to have this conversation again, that we don't create the same list and there's no activity, there's no completion to any of them. So
Well,
I don't know how to do that other than just bringing it up and kind of figuring out what our next step as a board, what our next
Right.
step is. Staff may know what their next step is, I think, I'm not sure, but it should be in sync with, we both should be in sync.
you know,
So that's the unknown.
and I agree with you completely, Robert. And our strategic planning committee is authorized, has that responsibility delegated to oversee project development. So I would ask today, after the meeting today, that staff capture the ideas and they should be referred to the strategic planning committee. They should consider it, review it, and distill them down into recommendations to the full board.
One of the things I would like to, if I may, Jim, just kind of accentuate, kind of lift it up, is that I think that's important for the board, and I think staff does it already, that to understand what that scheduling, development schedule will look like, and incorporating all of these activities, whether they are considered political or what is just pure development, what that will look like over a time period, whether it stretch out to 4 years or 5 years or 1 year at a time, what that will look like, so as to get, to me as a board member, and it may be helpful to other board members to see that what staff is working on and the progress milestones that we as a board can begin to look at and say, hey, we have reached that milestone, we can check that off and move on. So I don't know if that's possible.
Yes, I agree with Robert. I mean, what are the actionable items that we're gonna leave here with tonight? And I agree, Jim, that, we're all in favor, at least, well, not all, but most of us, with regard to building, at least looking at a new station, a fire station, and how that's defined is, not yet to be 100% determined. With regard to the training tower. But I will say, well, the one thing I did want to add with regard to the tower, and to kind of piggyback on what Todd Ellis said, was that some of the firefighters over the years, knowing that we've had this discussion for a few years now, they were concerned, Todd, just to let you know that I've heard this too, that if they're out of service to do training out of our district and they get a call, it'll be problematic. And so I just want everyone to know that that's what the firefighters have been telling me for the last few years. So I agree with that, Todd.
Great. Any further discussion? All right. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
I'll second.
So, Manny, did you have something to share with us?
Yeah, I'm sorry, we're ending this up. I just wanted to point out to you that current strategic plan strategy 3.0 specifically construct, maintain quality facilities to meet the current and future deployment, coverage, training, storage, and administrative needs of the district. So to Director Jones's point, we can work on that and task that out and get it back to you. Todd, I'll help you with putting that thing together. So it'll actually fit right into that one strategic initiative we've already had. And when you see that, what it comes out with specific objectives to meet that particular goal. And then there's an assignment to it and usually a timeline to it. So there's a format that's already there. We can implement that.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
And that'll go to strategic planning, Jim. I think we had already knew that was the path because that's where this came from. But I think, the two directors realized it was too big to take on for just the two of them, and wanted to move it on to a general meeting, which I think has been good and helpful and a nice start again to get this thing moving. And whether it makes it to the July or the August, I think I'll let the staff try and figure that out, because I did, just so all the directors here, because I know Director Jones had some comment on it, and Virginia, you mentioned it too. I think we see it. Priority one, the station, and then all the pieces that have gone along with what's been done. And then, take that and move it forward to strategic planning, as Manny just said, working within the existing framework of the strategic plan, accreditation, everything that we use as guiding elements, because that's already there. And then hopefully that'll get a well thought out, or at least certainly more systematic or prioritized or, cognitive report that will change what we just gave you, because this was more broad-based to see, what's going on. And even these phases, I would probably recategorize as options, and go from there. So I think that's certainly possible for July or August, but within the next couple of months. And then the last thing I would add is your outreach and, then your timeline, because I think that those are excellent points too.
Okay, and we'll look forward to seeing that, whether it's July or August. So, is there a motion to adjourn?
We
So
are.
moved. Oh.
It was one.
By Director Crawley.
I'm
Call
sorry,
for the vote.
Michelle.
I just said that we had already received a motion by Director Solano, seconded by Director Crawley.
Okay, very good. Then please call the vote.
Director Bernstein,
Aye.
Director Jones,
Aye.
Director Crawley,
Aye.
Director Solano,
Aye.
Director McLaughlin.
Aye. All right. Well, thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
All right.